Hello, everybody, and welcome to Frankenstein's podcast, where it's all about the monster. We are a creature feature podcast about monsters and why we love them. I am Joe Praska, one of the hosts. Unfortunately, Khalid is not with me this week. He had a scheduling conflict, so he is not here. But you might hear his voice at some point down the road if we record something else. I do really want to bring in our very special guest that we have with us today. We have Xueting C, who is a writer, speaker, and translator with a focus on promoting and discussing Chinese culture. She has written for a myriad of publications and written nonfiction books on Chinese myths, as well as collected and translated collections of Chinese fiction. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Joe. Thank you. It's awesome to be on the podcast.
I'm really glad we got a chance to sit down and chat. I know, unfortunately, Khalid's not here, but I think this will still be a really fun conversation. And you've kind of opened us up to like a very different new world of cool monsters. So I'm excited to chat.
I'm thrilled to hear that. Yeah, it is indeed an entire world of new monsters. Some are, with some universal features, but quite different from the Western monsters. So, yeah, really looking forward to discussing.
Absolutely. We have two questions that we ask every new guest to the podcast. And I want to ask you those right away before I get into some more specifics about your work. But our first question we always ask is, in all of like pop culture or history or mythology, what is your favorite monster or creature? And if it's not the same, what would you consider to be the scariest one for you?
So, no, they're not the same. When I get asked questions like this, my response tends to be that whenever there's a monster from a story, from a comic or film, my reaction would tend to be, well, they do seem scary, but they are kind of also quite cute in a way. So I have in my plushie collection Venom, a pyramid head. I have also a little cute chibi version of Hellboy. So yeah, I like my monsters. Um, I do feel a kind of kinship to them, as well as see them as scary beings. So my favorite monster is probably one of my favorite monsters is probably the Jiangshi, and this is the indigenous Chinese undead. They are usually translated mistakenly as the hopping vampires. If you've seen films like Mr. Vampire, the Hong Kong zombie film.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but they're actually, in actual fact, far more like zombies, but not quite totally zombies than vampires. I like them because they're very dynamic. There's different branches of the zombie law around the world. And crossing cultures originating from the Haitian cultures, but then spreading to the West, and then you have the Asian interpretations as well. Yeah, they're very dynamic, and they seem to represent something quite eternal in the loss of autonomy, whether it's for one reason or another. Timeless kind of representation of ghouls in our culture through the times in horror films and supernatural films. So yeah, that's my favorite monster, and the monsters that I find most scary is probably ghosts. I mean, I don't have a lot of problems with gore or violence. But the ghosts, the creepiness is what I find most scary. So such as the ghosts in films like Ju-on, The Grudge, or Del Toro's The Orphanage. So beings who are who were once alive, and their energies remain in a place, they're attached to a place, and they just won't be quietened until they have got what they needed. And they are kind of, you can't, trick them into not following you once you visited that place. They're just there, and they they attach themselves to whoever visit those places, and they stay with them. So yeah, the creepiness from those kind of stories really stay with me after I see those films. Um, I enjoy the stories. So yeah, ghosts
Good answer.
are
Yeah.
the scariest things for me.
Yeah, ghosts are. Yeah, I mean, ghosts could definitely be pretty terrifying. That's a good one. I have to say, I absolutely love that you have plushies of Venom, Pyramid Head, and Hellboy. That's delightful.
Yeah, I think yeah, they just I feel like they have this wonderful. They are monsters,
Yeah,
of course, but then there is kind of this wonderful frankness about them as well, uh, and directness, which I think it's maybe hard for humans to express sometimes in society, and that's what appeals to me about them. And I do have my Venom plush toy out. Have had it out for one of the Worldcon horror panels.
awesome. That is great. Yeah, I think that's kind of a cool thing just about like, dissecting monsters in general is I feel like they're almost more often than not like not the true like villain or true evil. There's always some sort of element of that relatability that have to kind of peel back the layers to discover, or like some sort of commentary on like the human condition in some way. That's always just really fascinating with these kinds of stories.
Yeah, yeah. Very often they're representing some kind of element of um, some element of human society, or
Yeah,
and they're not usually not the most evil.
right. Next question for you is what's on your geek card? What do you kind of consider yourself to be most geeky about?
I guess I tick a lot of the boxes for the standard geeky stuff, like the cult films and the comics.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much video games, as I haven't played a lot of them. It tends to be tabletop games that I like. Although I'm playing a bit more of those with things like RPGs with my friends now. And I'm also quite geeky about Chinese pop culture. And I guess I'm really lucky to be able to do that as a job, because culture is about how we make sense of the world around us, kind of you know the meaning that we attach to symbols in language and other things. So it covers a wide area. It kind of allows me to go into comics or animation, film, TV, and also enables me to go on cool shows like this. So yeah.
Amazing. Yes, I love that. Um, so I had over the past month or two, we scheduled this a while in advance. I checked out a couple of your works, Synopticon, which is a celebration of Chinese science fiction. You collected Chinese science fiction stories and translated them into this collection, and then Sinophasia, which is a celebration of Chinese horror, which you did the same thing for with Chinese horror. Um, Fantastic collections. I am working my way through Synopticon right now. I got Sinophasia first. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you, just as like kind of like a translator, like as your job as a translator, I've recently been watching more like foreign films with the subtitles and the translations, and kind of like been curious about that too. Um, what's the balance that you strike as a translator, like trying to make something literal or like thinking about idioms and how do you translate the idiom into it? Do you, do you use literal language? Like is there like a philosophy that you have with that?
With translating,
Yeah.
so I tend to see myself as a curator. My role is a
Okay.
curator of culture, of literature, as an expression of culture, um, kind of thing. Uh, so for me, the criteria for a good translation is that it needs to be accurate, and it needs to be relevant, and the language needs to flow well. And very rarely can you translate something literally from one
Right.
language to another. It's all kind of adaptive, an adaptive process, because you have the grammar, you have the syntax, and the different word order. And idioms and proverbs is another level of adaptation. So I tend to want to keep, so my approach is cultural heterogeneity. So I tend to want to keep, retain the elements from the original culture in the language I'm translating into, i.e., from Chinese into English, provided, but still make the language work, make sure it flows well. So sometimes this takes a bit of creativity, some more adaptation, but sticking to the essence of the meaning in Chinese, the intention, the author's intention, or the cultural originality. Um, Sometimes you just can't say the same thing,
Hmm.
say things in the same way, have the same metaphors. Other times it kind of works. So it just involves some kind of creativity in English, maybe sometimes inventing some metaphors that would work, or writing something a bit unusual that make people think, oh, that seems to be a new way of feeling and thinking through reading. So that's my kind of approach I take with translating.
Interesting. When I was reading through Sinophasia, I was reading through your introduction again, and one of the things that I think stood out to me when you were describing the difference of like Chinese horror versus something like Western horror, you mentioned that like Western horror kind of leaned more into like cautionary tales, whereas Chinese horror had more of like a journal or documentational sort of vibe. I was wondering if you could just speak to that just briefly.
I wrote that. That was a long time. So yeah, a major branch of the Western horror stories does seem to be, don't chant Beetlejuice three times. Don't go into the
Yeah.
woods at night, and or, and of course people still do.
Yeah. Hence the stories.
Otherwise, there'd be no story. Whereas the Chinese have taken a lot of influences from modern horror storytelling from the West, but the traditional stuff stems from recounting of strange things. So, in the very early times, these were kind of documentations of peripheral lands
Hmm.
by kind of officials that then they reported to the rulers. So they would they would note down the peoples and strange objects and terrain of peripheral regions, um, so that the ruler in the central parts could, or people in other regions could find out about them. And then this evolved into talking about strange phenomenon, from the weather to some crime or something supernatural, through the centuries. And then that became more fictionalized, and that gradually gained the horror elements. So, yeah, that's what I mean about the journalistic elements. And it's
Hmm.
also in the way that the writer presents themselves in the traditional horror literary form of strange tales. The writer would present themselves as an editor or compiler of tales. They were told these stories by friends or passers-by or people they meet, and then they would then tell the reader this story. So
Hmm.
it's kind of interesting because then that allows them to kind of do interesting things with a narrative and have different narrative voices and commentary and things.
Yeah, that is really cool.
But then they, of course, a lot of it is invented by the writers.
Of course, right. Um, do you feel like, so kind of spanning different like genres of speculative fiction with the work that you're doing, do you feel like you're drawn more towards like sci-fi or horror? Is there one that you feel like you're more, oh, I'm really like really excited about?
Um, I feel like they're all my favorite genres,
Hmm.
sci-fi, horror. Uh, that's why I've been trying to. Uh, so I published the sci-fi anthology because I found the opportunity at last after many years of trying to publish an anthology.
Mhm.
To saying to people this stuff is really cool. China does do sci-fi, and with horror is so the next one I thought would be good to look at the reverse side of the coin in terms of Chinese horror, looking at the hopes and looking at the fears and preoccupations rather than the hopes and dreams of a people or peoples, a nation. Um, but yeah, I like them both actually, and sometimes in the horror stories I translate, there are sci-fi elements, like there are two in Xenophasia, and sometimes there are horror elements in the science fiction I translate. And sometimes they cross. Um, and another one of my favorite genre fiction is martial arts fantasy stories, which I'm now working on my next book. So that's the subject I'm working on next. And I'm hoping to also publish some fiction, translate some fiction as well from China. The non-fiction book I'm working on is about pop culture, the global pop culture of martial arts, fantasy fiction, wuxia fiction. So yeah, I have a few kind of I read across these genres, and um, rather than having one absolute favorite one, I like many different types of stories.
Yeah, I feel you with that. I feel like that's even just like the podcast, we kind of zoom in on monsters a lot, but like we also try to actively like let's choose a monster from like a fantasy thing or like go more sci-fi this time, and a lot of time leans into horror, but I think that it's we're sort of all over the place, and I think that just reflects fandoms in general. And I think not to stay in one kind of box. It's nice to just branch out to different kind of stories and all sorts of tales.
Well, that's great that you take that approach too. Um,
Yeah.
that you don't just look at the horror storytelling. However, I do think that horror, the horror genre, it really needs a push at the moment in China because
Mm.
it's not really considered a proper literary writing, not yet anyway. But I'm seeing this fantastic horror adjacent storytelling coming out of China now, and I feel like the time is right. I mean, people like reading horror at the moment around the world, and certainly China could do with more horror writing to kind of deal with a lot of the issues that have come up over the last decade or two. So
Interesting. Yeah, I think that I even saw when you were writing the intro also, you mentioned that one of the words in China for like horror, like is similar or even the same as the word for terrorism, I think you said.
oh yeah, 恐怖. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's also the word used for terrorism, like terror and terrorism.
Right.
But I mean, in English, terror, that only refers to a very narrow band of what horror fiction can generate in the audience, right? That is terror. It's like the fear of the thing happening that's scary, the thing of being chased, or a murder, or something dangerous happening. It's that kind of feeling that we have horror, we have dread. There's a lot of other emotions that I feel like the other terms, or the terms that I amalgamated between two of the terms that refer to horror fiction, would describe better.
Interesting. Very interesting. One last question about the book, then we'll move on to our movies we're talking about. So given that we are kind of a monster podcast, one of the ones that stuck out to me was The Waking Dream. That was a story that I thought was really fun from a monster element, and it also had a really cool like tech sci-fi piece to it. That was just a cool story all around. But is there any stories in either of the books that you might point to for fans of maybe this podcast who like monsters, creature features, that you'd say this would be a good one you'd recommend?
In either of the anthologies. Yeah, I really like Waking Dream. That's one of my favorites as well to translate and to discuss. So there's quite a few portrayals of the monstrous in Sinophagia. There is the Records of Jiangshi, which is like an adventure horror story of troops going into the mountains, deep into the unknown mountains, where they really find themselves out of their depth and encountering ever bigger, more powerful monsters. So the monster in that one is interesting because we get like it brings in, so that's folk horror. So there's elements of esoteric lore and things like witchcraft and kind of paranormal, that sense of monstrous, and also brings into question what makes a monster. How do you define a monster? What is really a monster? And it kind of, the monster has different facets depending on how it's told in folklore, how it's imagined. And another story is the one about the mandrill in the story called Shan Xiao. That's a xianxia story, so a martial arts fantasy with supernatural elements. That one certainly deals with the monstrous, but the monstrous in humans as well as monsters that are created that are non-human. So yeah, that one has quite a lot of kind of shocking elements, but psychologically shocking, but also kind of gore and jumps as well. That one. And then there's of course the Waking Dream, the digital monsters, the monsters of the metaverse that are kind of depicted in a fantastic range in the story. I think these are the main ones that immediately come to mind.
Yeah, those are some great recommendations. I mean, I would say to anyone listening to this, like read the whole books, of course, all the books, because they're great. But yeah, those are some highlights for sure for the monster lovers in us. Thank you for answering all those questions about your work. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Yeah.
We You recommended to me when we were kind of reaching out initially a couple films that we're going to talk a little bit about that from Chinese culture that reflect, kind of the monster storytelling. The first one being A Chinese Ghost Story from 1987 and its subsequent sequels, as well as more recently, The Enchanting Phantom, which is an update on that. I know he's not here with us, but you are going to hear a little bit of his voice. We got a little synopsis from our homeboy, Khalid. Take it away, Khalid.
A Chinese Ghost Story, 1987 and 2011, directed by Ching Siu-tung and Wilson Yip. You've heard of Boy Meets Girl, but Boy Meets Ghost Girl? Even scarier, the boy is a debt collector. Follow Ning Choi-san through a fantastical haunted adventure that's equal parts a comedy of errors and a badass sky ballet. If Jackie Chan and William Shakespeare teamed up to make a musical, it would look a lot like this.
What a monster!
They're creatures of the abstract that live off potential energy.
It's alive!
Of course, another banger. Thank you so much, Khalid. So, the plot of the Chinese Ghost Story I was reading is drawn from one of the book of stories called Strange Stories from a Chinese Studio, which I believe is from the mid 1700s. Have you read that before?
I have read it. It's a very well-known classic.
Mm-hmm.
There's something like close to 500 tales in the whole compilation. So I think it's one of those classics that everyone has read some of in China, and it's also quite famous. It has been translated in a selection in English, published in the early to mid 20th century. And it's one of those strange tales I was talking about, where the Pu Songling, the author, presents himself as a compiler of stories. Yeah, so he's had a very interesting life and experience in storytelling. So he wanted to become an official, a civil servant, but he failed in that. So he was just writing in his little cottage, and he also ran a tea shop during the day where he, sold tea and chatted to the customers, and they told him stories of the strange, which then he documented into this huge compilation of ghost stories and other types of strange phenomenon. So
I love that. That's like a tea shop and then horror stories pairs. Like it's such a cozy horror vibe.
yeah, his tea shop of horrors. Yeah,
Yes, I love
um,
that.
yeah, that's one of the really great classic. It's a great story about his writing of the ghost stories. So in the original of this Chinese ghost story, the tropes that we identify so much with the story now because of that film were only hinted at, but we can see the foundations in the original story. So the original story is quite long in relation to the comparison, but quite a short story. And we do have the female ghost being trapped and being exploited by the other demons. And the scholar helps her. He's not a tax collector, he's just a scholar in that one. And he helps her move her bones and therefore frees her from the being imprisoned. And then she kind of becomes his, because polygamy was on men's polygamy was socially accepted at the time. She becomes his second wife, which of course is not acceptable in today's ethics.
Right.
So that had to be adapted, and the whole tree demon tentacles thing, that was a creation of the film. for fantastic fights. Of course, we like
Yeah.
the monster fights, and the whole all the sexual elements, the undertones, that was also created by the film, because although there are other ghosts mentioned in the original story, the whole kind of brothel kind of vibe to that scene, it really stems from like historical fiction. The brothel themes in Chinese historical fiction, as in that's a popular kind of trope. So it's interesting to see what's in the original and what's not in the original.
Yeah, that is really fascinating to hear. And even like when you mentioned that in the original story he was a scholar, and then the Chinese ghost story he's a tax collector, but then the more recent one, the Enchanting Phantom, they go back to having to be a scholar again. I noted just watching the films like, oh, scholar versus tax collector, but that's kind of interesting. That wonder why they changed it to tax collector.
Yeah, due to in some of the stories, in some of Pu Songling's stories, so he was the writer himself was very far away from the political centers, because he only got to a certain level in the imperial exams. He couldn't pass them and become a civil servant. This is due to various reasons, including dynastic changes. But he was very concerned about the state of society and politics. And tax collectors were often not so savory tax collectors were often part of his other stories. So it's quite interesting that so there's quite a lot of social commentary. So tax collectors, salt merchants, and poverty, corruption, they were part of the storytelling in his collection. So maybe they introduced the tax collector role into that as something adjacent to the tone of his collection.
Oh yeah, just kind of conglomerate other elements of the stories into the adaptation in a sense. Yeah, that's kind of cool. Yeah, it's a I really liked. I'd had Chinese Ghost Story on my list to watch for a while now. Like it's just been like on my to watch list. It's one I've always wanted to check out, and I'm glad we finally got the chance to check it out. Like it's a really cool and interesting film. And I mentioned to this to you in an email that I had trouble finding it actually, because a lot of the licensing or rights were all goofy in the US. I don't know why. And I was trying to order the Blu-ray, but it was also coming from China. I ordered on eBay, and the person emailed me and was like, I won't be able to come for several weeks because of the tariffs or like challenges in the US, because the US is a mess right now. But we did find it. Fortunately, we found a way but I still have the Blu-ray coming, so I'll get to rewatch it eventually. But it's a really cool film. I've talked a lot about how I'm a big fan of like 80s horror in pop culture in general, and I feel like this is firmly in that kind of vibe. As just like a fan of 80s horror, to see kind of like a different kind of like take on that in that era, I felt like there were elements of like an almost like a Sam Raimi Evil Dead like vibe with some of the shots that were kind of interesting. That was fun, but I also feel like, and then there was the stop motion. So there's just a lot of cool like techniques that were used. And I have to say, I was surprised to hear you say that the tree demon was an invention for the film, because I think that was such a cool element. And like the idea that the whole, like one of the big climactic battles was with just like this massive, like practical tongue with tentacles
Yeah.
was just no notes. It's perfect. I loved that. That was so much fun. What do you think about the movie adaptation? You're a fan of it? I take it.
Yeah, I think it's really excellent. I think it's a great use of special effects, and it's got some great set pieces of action, and then mixing with like drama as well. It's really good, very atmospheric, kind of really great example of the new wave filmmaking. You can see that the budget was supposedly okay, but not that high, because a lot of the shots were still quite close up, and they used like reverse shots for
Yeah.
people jumping up and
Oh yeah. Yep.
jumping down instead from the tree fights. And yeah, you're absolutely right about the Evil Dead and Sam Raimi influences. I think they definitely have influences from those films. A lot of the tracking shots, the low point of view, rapid tracking shots, or the exploding floorboards and things like
Yeah.
that, definitely inspired by Evil Dead. Yeah, this was 1987, so it would have been after those films.
That's right. Yeah. And those some of those creatures that they did the stop motion with, which I believe it was the Jiangshi, I think that's what you mentioned earlier too, right?
Yeah, that's it. The Jiangshi from the stiff corpse
Mm-hmm.
that they encounter in the temple. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, the look of those and just like the whole like stop motion, like all of that was delightful. Like as a fan of like practical effects, like the scrappiness of it, it was great.
Yeah, I really like the special effects that are practical. There is definitely something that CG can't really replace with that. And the growing the skeletons, they're kind of under the floor where the scholar Xu Xian
Mm-hmm.
is staying. Um, that also kind of I see elements of Ray Harryhausen stop motion
Yeah,
growing skeletons as well, and but then there's also elements of from kind of 70s sci-fi horror
right.
from other parts of Asia, like Power Rangers, the shooting rays um, from the hands. That kind
Yeah, that's true. And the warriors, like when he would draw the stuff on his hand and like shoot out like fire.
yeah,
Yeah, that was cool. That was a cool touch. Like the magical elements were very fun, and I like how they just kind of it just kind of all was part of it. Like they didn't have to stop and explain too much of it. You kind of just roll with it.
yeah. Because you have so they represent the Taoist magic
Right.
that way. Uh, the Taoist character is in the book, is in the original story,
Hmm.
and there's the element of danger of something evil lurking is definitely in the original, but is elaborated in the film.
Yeah. Yeah. The Taoist warrior. What was his character's name? Was it Yen?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. I liked him quite a bit. I love it in the 80s one how he got like a musical number.
Yeah, that's
That
great,
was
isn't it? It's going back to the Evil Dead influences. It really works well as a black comedy. The black
yeah.
comedy parts works very well with the hapless scholar character, who's like a staple of these kind of ghost stories.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, he
I,
has a musical number that's quite. Yeah, it's really catchy.
I liked it. Yeah.
And if
um,
you ever watch two, they also have the musical number in number two, the Chinese Ghost Story 2 as well.
I love that. I didn't get a chance to watch 2 yet, but I'm excited to watch it. It seems like from what I've read, it's sort of like almost ups the wackiness. Like there's more monsters and more creatures and some different elements like that.
Yeah, so they clearly have a bigger budget for number two.
Mm,
They've kept all the set pieces because I guess it works so well, like the temple fight, the tree demon, the scene with the girls and the
yeah.
mother, the hermaphrodite villain. They kept all those set pieces, and also the Black Prince pit is
Mhm.
replaced by a cult leader.
Ah,
But the special effects are better. They've increased the kind of scale of things.
right.
Uh,
Yeah.
but I'm really glad you liked Yen, the Taoist monk, because interestingly, yeah, he's this fantastic representation of like the demon slayer, and the film version is more based on Zhonghui, who is a mythical demon slayer, and I write about him in my non-fiction, the book called From Kuan to Chairman Mao, which is a cultural history of different gods, a pop cultural history of different gods in Chinese culture. So he is a mythical demon slayer who has died, and then decided that he's died and become a ghost, and thought that he would, go around slaying other demons. So with a big bushy beard and the moustache and gruff manner, that's a very Zhonghui representation. And interestingly, he was so successful in that role that the actor Wu Ma then went on to direct a film called Chinese Ghostbuster in 1994, I think, and he was starring in that role with very much the same kind of depiction, but as the demon slayer instead.
So that actor has just got like demon slayer energy that he just kind of brought throughout his roles.
Yeah, he has demon slayer energy.
I love that. He was great. Wanted to talk about the remake a little bit. So the Enchanting Phantom, I watched that as well, and that it seemed to follow the story pretty similarly. It did seem to have a lot more CGI, of course, given the time, than the old practical effects of the 80s, but there certainly was some practical bits. I liked it well enough too. I think I still personally, I think I like the 80s version more. I thought that was just, there's some charm to it and scrappiness to it, but this was a cool adaptation, and I think there were like some really interesting, I think it took more of a horror approach. Like there was those like eyeless phantoms, or the phantoms that were kind of around the tree demon woman, or the tree demon. And the opening fight sequence was really interesting and cool. They also, the kind of prosthetic makeup they put on the tree demon when she was fighting. So there was some, and the Black Mountain demon, of course, at the end, which was CGI, was a different addition. What did you think? What do you think of the Enchanting Phantom as an update?
I really liked it. It was an official remake, so there are elements they needed to adhere to, but it's quite telling which elements they took. These other parts have become so iconic in horror storytelling of today. Has influenced so many other films and novels, such as Bride with White Hair, for instance, and other renditions as well. So yeah, I really liked it. I think that it emphasized the horror elements even more, but tell that you can tell what the aesthetics the first film established, like the wedding horror, for example. So the very elaborate costumes and props and sets against this very dire situation where the woman is being forced into the marriage. So that kind of wedding horror with the kind of flowing robes, and the lantern hoods flowing in the wind, that kind of very, very iconic Chinese sense of horror. The procession that we get in the original, and we get in the remake as well. So that's one, and then the other one is this kind of gender ambiguous hermaphrodite arch villain that pretty much that film established, and you get in so many other films.
Oh, I was wondering about that. Yeah, because I was like, that I thought the implication at first when I was watching it was the tree demon was sort of female, but then I saw that it was a male actor portraying the character. So I was going to ask you about that. And then they kept that through both of them, I saw.
Yeah, they kept that, and it's not in the original. The original, it was a woman, an old woman who is an old demon who was trapping the younger female ghost. So that that was a total invention of this film. I'm not sure if this was the first one to do that, but I think it may stem from kind of martial arts fantasies, like by film directors like King Hu, who kind of really made the period of histories involving eunuch domination in the courts very famous, such as during the Ming Dynasty, and his portrayal of the usurping eunuchs were these, fantastically, again, gender ambiguous, but fantastically evil, usually with non-normative appearance as well. So maybe it's come from that. It could be a possibility, but yeah, that kind of, we also see that in films, later films like Bride with White Hair, and in things like Judge D films much later in the next
Fascinating.
century. So that's one iconic element, and also things like the Chinese Gothic, the meteorological haunting elements, the mist, the wind, the storm, the ruined temples, cemetery, blown leaves, all kind of that kind of atmospheric horror storytelling the was what the 87 film made very iconic to subsequent storytelling.
Yeah, it seems like it's kind of it's sort of like created a whole subgenre in and of itself. And yeah, and that's kind of that all those kind of blending of things, and comedy, horror, fantasy, martial arts, all of that stuff together and wrapped into one cool thing.
Yeah, I mean, the first one has horror elements. It has mainly horror elements and black comedy. But it's like those series of franchise, like the Alien films, where
Yeah.
each film is a different genre. If you watch the second one, it's got far more martial arts fantasy. The first one has a little bit too, had some. The second one is far more like a wuxia horror film than
Yeah.
the first one. Yeah, I mean, I always say this about Chinese films when I talk about them on podcasts or programs, that the division of genre isn't the same as other traditions. It's always the boundary is a bit more blurred between, if it's something is fantasy or thriller or science fiction or realist.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's kind of blurring the lines a lot. It's cool. Which is your favorite of the stories? I mean, between, not to say that this is the remake, but do you like Chinese Ghost Story 1, 2, or 3? Do you have a preference for them, or is the original always kind of the top tier for you?
Yeah, I think the original is the best one. I really, really like the remake as well, because that is
Yeah.
made by a mainland Hong Kong collaboration, and it kind of shows the influence of the first film, but also at the same time how far horror storytelling has come, and kind of how filmmaking has matured between the two films. So yeah, the first one is the best one for me. I haven't seen the third one. There is a number 3.
Yeah, I saw that too. I didn't hear as much about that one in doing research, so I don't know if it's as popular.
Yeah, probably not as iconic as the first one. The second one, I mean, because I'm working on martial arts fantasy, I should maybe be more interested in the second one, because that's definitely a wuxia story where um, the Xiaoqian, the female ghost, has now reincarnated into her next life. She's then a martial artist in a sect
Ooh.
whose father and clan leader has been arrested on wrongful charges, and they're trying to rescue him. And then they meet with the general who is escorting him to the prison, to the trial, and then they kind of he realizes later that the person behind this that's going wrong is the cult leader, who's also controlling a lot of the wider politics. But anyway, it's a martial arts story, so it's far more a martial arts wuxia fantasy than the first one, with more fights, of course, and an element of kind of more social commentary as well.
Interesting. Like you said, with the increased budget, a little bit more scope and ability to do some more, fights and complex movements and everything. One quick thing I was interested to in, you mentioned that Yen is kind of like a Taoist fighter, and so like I think that when we talk about a lot of like demons or spirits in like a lot of Western horror, they're often rooted in like Christian mythology or the Abrahamic stories, of course. Are a lot of the Chinese like myths and monsters kind of rooted in like Taoist mythology or like culture or history? Like where do some of those myths originate from?
Wow, that brings me back all the way to writing my first book, the Enchanting Phantom book, where I wrote about 60 deities. It was absolutely crazy. There are multiple pantheons, and a crazy experience where I need to make all these different branches into a sort of history that where people can make sense of the development. Yeah, the answer is some of them are from Buddhism, which came over to China from India and really took root. And then there's the indigenous Taoist ones, and then a lot of them are from folklore. Sometimes they're from folklore versions of Taoist or Buddhist versions, Taoist versions of the originally Buddhist gods, or vice versa, or sometimes they're folklore versions of official Taoist and Buddhist gods and demons. Yeah, so it's a mixture really. It's a real mixture of different types.
Yeah, it's really cool. I like it. It makes for some fun storytelling for sure, and definitely that your nonfiction book, the Chairman. Can you give me the full title of that book?
Yeah, it has a very convoluted title. From Kuan Yin to Chairman Mao, an essential guide to Chinese deities.
That's right, and that's so good. Good opportunity to plug that for anyone who's interested in more of that conversation for sure. I don't want to take too much more of your time. I know you're over in the UK, so there's a big time difference here, but we'll move on to our quick final segment of our podcast, and then we'll close out. So we always end just with a segment we call What the Fandom, in which we just share like something that we're kind of into that may or may not have anything to do with what we just talked about, may have nothing to do with monsters. So I'll go first. Just something I want to plug to our listeners, and then I'll let you share something that you're into. So for my fandom this week, I've actually been super busy, and I've like been watching a lot of these movies. So this has kind of been my vibe lately, a Chinese ghost story. But something I watched outside of that that I want to plug on the podcast is I recently picked up the Criterion Edition version of the movie Bound from the Wachowskis. It's just like a mob thriller, but it's got this kind of like subversion of it in that it follows like two women who fall in love and then end up taking on the mafia. And it's just a really fun story from the 90s. And I've been kind of like, for some reason, I've been finding comfort in like 90s movies and 80s movies a lot more lately. And I think that's just because like, modern times is wild. And so sometimes like throwbacks feel comforting. But I would highly recommend, if anyone's interested in some older movies, but also the Wachowskis, who went on to do The Matrix and some other great things like Jupiter Ascending, which I guess some people might not argue is great, but I like it. I would recommend going back. You can see some of their cool early filmmaking techniques starting to sprout that you see more perfected in like The Matrix or something like that. So I was a big fan of that. And what about you, Xueting? What are you
First
into
of
right
all,
now?
yeah, I like I really love the Wachowskis films, particularly the earlier stuff. So
They're great.
definitely
Yeah.
gonna check out that one. Queer women taking on the
Oh yeah, it's
mafia.
great.
That sounds like a great plot line. Yeah, and I definitely agree about 80s and 90s films because they are such, you never get times like that again. And they're really, really complex,
Mm-hmm.
interesting times in history and lots going on in the arts. Sometimes subversive, sometimes more kind of reflective. So, yeah. So, what am I reading? So, I've recently read a couple of. So I've just finished a couple of horror books I have recently read. One is Nuzo Ono's Sleepless. It's which I found really excellent, uh, fantastic, excellent horror. It's set during the Biafran War, kind of in Nigeria, a very
Mm.
kind of, but just at the start of that, quite a brutal and um, disturbing time of history. I I would say maybe enjoy is not the right word, but I really think it's really excellent storytelling. It's like folk horror with elements of the fantastic and indigenous
Mm.
culture and magic. I it I found it so it had a child narrator, and I did find it very hard to read at times. But I thought if the writer could write about this, and if then it potentially is reflective of children who've gone through experiences like this, the least I can do is follow it through. It wasn't hard to read because it wasn't good. It was great. It was just there were very disturbing elements, and I'm really glad it's an excellent book. I really recommend it. And the last thing I've just finished is an original TV show called Kill My Sins. And it's the best of these kind of Tang Dynasty mystery tales that are really flourishing at the moment in Chinese fiction and screen works. So very, it's one of the golden ages of China, but very kind of elaborate city, um, you know, materialistically very, a lot of wealth, a lot of exchange, but then with kind of dark undertones. Because your urbanization, you're getting crime, you're getting underclass of people. So a really, really nice kind of setting for mystery tale. And this is about a woman who is a prototype of a Chinese psychiatrist, a physician, and she works in the capital and is trying to make sense of a unresolved case of mass murder and crime that she was unwittingly part of as a child, and things unravel. And yeah, so I really like it. It's really well written script, strong sense of kind of procedural drama, but also very good use of horror storytelling. A lot of the elements we were talking about,
Ooh.
the gothic, and we can tell that the ghosts are coming from her own head, her past haunting her. But then there are occasional moments where the director, the showmakers, they kind of play with your mind because the protagonist is not there, but you're seeing the ghosts and the ghouls on screen, and you're kind of thinking, well, why am I seeing them? Are they actually manifestations? Have they become real? So yeah, really interesting horror aesthetics. So I recommend those.
Cool. Yeah, great recommendations. Definitely looking forward to checking those out for sure. And I will link those. I will also link your books, your works in our show notes as well for anyone's interested in any of the titles that we've mentioned. Xueting, do you have any last things you wanted to shout out, as in like where people could find you, or any other social media sites or anything?
Yeah, so I write, I kind of rotate between fiction and non-fiction. So the next book I'm working on now is a book of wuxia non-fiction about global pop culture, wuxia storytelling, and then working on a couple of anthologies, one that's based on China, the other one is a book of queer anthology, and a couple of other future projects. So in between books, I create content on social media, Blue Sky and Instagram, and some Chinese social media as well, but mainly those two. And then people can keep updated. I get interesting, fun tidbits of pop culture from those. Then in between, I have shorter projects of translated short stories that I publish, or articles that I write on my own website or publish on other platforms. Occasionally, I do talks and events, but I usually post about them on social media. So then there's my website, which are on all my handles. So that's how you can stay in touch and stay tuned.
Great. Well, thank you again for taking the time to chat with me. I was really excited to finally dig into this world of like Chinese mythology and horror, and I'm really excited to now feel like I have a better foundation to go forward and watch more of the stuff and read more of the stuff. So I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Joe. It was a really interesting discussion, and I had a fantastic time.
Great. And if you ever feel the itch to talk about more monsters, you know where to go.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah. And to our listeners, please check out our social sites, Instagram, Blue Sky. We're on those two as well at Franken Podcast. Check out our Patreon. We do have a Patreon with short episodes called Franken Bits. We haven't released any in a little while, but Khalid and I do have a couple in the works that should be coming out soon. So look for those if you're interested in a couple levels to support. Thank you all, listeners. And I know Khalid usually does the outro, so it feels weird for me. But thank you all for listening. Creep it easy.